Welcome to the Mother Tongue Film Festival roundtable discussion of Kiraiñnia, long flutes. My name is Elliot Oakley, and I'm the programming director for the Center for Research and Collaboration in the Indigenous Americas, CRACIA, as many of you know, at the University of Maryland. CRACIA was founded in 2014 to bring together faculty, researchers, students, practitioners, and Indigenous affiliates to expand the knowledge and resources of Amazonian studies at the University of Maryland, but also the surrounding region. And so on behalf of all of our members, we're excited to continue partnering with the Smithsonian Mother Tongue Film Festival to welcome you to today's discussion of Kiraiñnia, or long flutes. This film, which is a 2021 Mother Tongue selection, is a deep immersion into the process of remaking instruments and affects in Camuti, an indigenous community in the Vaupés River Valley in southern Colombia. And so the Mother Tongue Film Festival began in 2016. It opens each year on the UN International Mother Languages Day, February 21st. This year, the festival takes place entirely online, but as always, it highlights the confluence of cinematic and mother languages. Our theme this year is the healing power of storytelling. If you're new to the festival, I encourage you to check out their website, mothertongue.si.edu, where you can, hopefully you've seen this film, but you can also see other featured films and upcoming events. This event is being recorded and will become part of the festival's YouTube channel. So today we have Kiraiñnia director Juan Castrillón, joined in conversation by Janet Chernela and Orlando Rodriguez. Janet Chernela is professor of anthropology at the University of Maryland, where she also serves as co-director of CRACIA. She received her PhD with distinction from Columbia University in 1983, where Irving Goldman was one of her dissertation advisors, and she has conducted field research in the Brazilian Amazon since 1978. Dr. Chernela is author of the book A Sense of Space, The Wanano Indians of the Brazilian Amazon, and numerous articles. The Wanano, also known as the Cotiria, are neighbors and in-laws of the Cubeo along the Vaupés River in the Northwest Amazon, which is the focus of today's film and discussion. Orlando Rodriguez Hernandez is a member of the Cubeo-Hehenewa clan of the Vaupés region. He received a BA degree in anthropology from the Universidad Nacional de Colombia for his thesis on the Cubeo traditional system for curing disease. He also has a certificate in human resources from Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana. Orlando's professional career advocates for indigenous populations in situations of vulnerability. He has served as vice president of the Organization of Indigenous Peoples of the Colombian Amazon, as well as delegate on Indigenous Affairs for the Colombian Ministry of the Interior and Justice, and as the legal representative of the Cubeo Indigenous Association of the Curuyari River. Currently, Orlando coordinates MeToo's office of the Colombian Institute of Family Welfare and offers consulting services on self-determined educational programs to different Indigenous associations of the Vaupés. About a year ago, before the intensifying effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, Janet hoped to have the opportunity to spend time with Orlando in MeToo. She was able to visit his house, but found out he was very busy working on a campaign and was unable to meet. Several days later, she saw two other anthropologists from Germany who were also looking for Orlando, but he was also too busy with his ongoing work. And so this gives hopefully a sense of of Orlando's importance, but also how fortunate we are that he can join us here today. A year on, we can gather virtually for this conversation. And Janet and Orlando are both here to speak with us, with Juan. And so it's my pleasure to introduce our director of Kiraiñnia, Juan Castrillón, who is a doctoral candidate in ethnomusicology at the University of Pennsylvania. His intellectual agenda is primarily ethnographic, conducting fieldwork in Turkey, as well as the Northwestern Amazon. His methods include collaborative projects for producing texts, films, digital archives, multimodal installations, and radio. Juan is a member of CRACIA, as well as of SALSA, the Society for the Anthropology of Lowland South America, where he's a board member. And he's the partnership director for the Collective for Advancing Multimodal Research Arts at the University of Pennsylvania. Our discussion today will take place in English and in Spanish. Autumn Zellers-Leon will translate from Spanish to English for the full audience, while also interpreting from English to Spanish directly with Orlando. Autumn completed her doctorate in anthropology from Temple University in 2018. Her work focuses on the impact of drug crop cultivation in Colombia's indigenous communities. She is based in her hometown of Philadelphia and is an experienced facilitator of scholarly and cultural exchanges between her home city and Colombia. And just to mention now, during the audience discussion, we welcome questions in English, Spanish, and as well as Portuguese. And with that, without further ado, I'm happy to hand over now to Juan Castrillón to begin our discussion of the film.
Thank you, Elliot, for your introduction. I'm so happy to be sharing this film with all of you. As you know, I had the chance to screen a previous version of the film at the last meeting in Salsa years ago, and now after years of working on the film, it is now accepted at the Mother Tongue Film Festival, which is great, and I'm so really honored to keep the conversation about the film with Janet, with Orlando, and I hope this conversation will enrich and enhance your own appreciation of on the film. So there are some aspects that we would like to highlight regarding the film. The film comes from a research among the Cubeo-Hehenewa of Camuti. So making the film was not a singular activity that happened during my participatory fieldwork. It was part of the everyday life, living there. So with this, I wanted to highlight that even though it is a film as a product, the footage was produced outside of like a documentary production. So I was joining activities, everyday activities with them, and I was carrying the camera with me almost all the time. And after let's say Labor Day ended, I was trying to edit, I was taking notes, or trying to figure out how to organize or reorganize scenes, as much as when we take notes and write when we are doing research. The first version of the film was completed while I was in Me Too. We did a rough cut version in Pamiers, and we had the chance to screen this first version in Me Too and in other Cubeo communities around 2018. The version you watched and the version that is presented at the Mother Tongue Festival is the version made for English speaker audiences and Spanish speaker audiences as well. So this is like an overall regarding the film you watched. So talking to Janet, we realized the importance of like presenting an aspect that really matters for the community that appears in the film, which is a Tucanoan community. So I would like to pass it to Janet.
Thank you. Let me just begin by talking a little bit about Goldman and his experiences in the same village where this film was made, because Goldman describes himself as being analogous to Boaz, who was his mentor, as we all know. Goldman was one of the last students of Boaz, and Boaz's relationship with George Hunt. So in his book, The Cubeo, published in 1963, but based on his fieldwork in 1939, Goldman acknowledges the help that he gets from his colleagues, collaborators. And he does the same thing in his later 1979 fieldwork, published in his later book on the Hehenewa. In that book, we happen to read about Orlando's father and Orlando's uncles, who worked very closely with Goldman. We also are fortunate enough to read about Severiano, who appears in the film. He's dancing in the very last scene, and he was Juan's host in the village of Camuti. So with that acknowledgement, I'll proceed to talk about the village of Camuti and its constituents. The film is, as you know, a very beautiful account of the recollection of flute making, retrieving into the past the memories of a festival, an event that is rarely practiced these days. And the person who begins to tell us about the flutes is Fernando, who is a Carapana. He's an in-law of the Cubeo of Camuti. And the film proceeds with these two in-marrying families. Fernando, who's working with the flutes, represents the visiting in-law family. The residing in-law family is represented by Maria and Ernesto, who are the owners of the festival. Fabiola represents the Hehenewa, and she, as a host, is the person who serves the beer. So that's what we're looking at. It seems to be complex, but these are the ways of the Northwest Amazon, where groups necessarily, in many cases, marry among themselves and then celebrate that very phenomenon as they do in this film. So you see Maria talking at length about how she recalls her father. Her father was the owner of a longhouse for 40 years, according to Juan. She recalls her father and how he used to welcome many, many, many people. Laura recalls how her husband used to greet, one by one, he would greet everyone. I think it's Maria who also talks about how her father used to swim with the flutes. These are memories that for them, in their own words, they find very painful to recall because, as they say, these were happy times, times when they united with the ancestors. And so we're seeing actually a very moving ceremony before our very eyes as people try to reconstitute a past phenomenon that in some ways still exists, but not entirely. We're seeing the reintegration of the remaining pieces of memory, as well as the loss of memory, the possibilities for retrieving memory, and so on. Let's pass now to Orlando, who will be able to speak with great authority on these issues.
Quisiéramos, Orlando, que nos hablara o nos hiciera las preguntas que tiene sobre el film, sobre la película. Adelante.
Just a moment.
Bueno.
Okay.
A ver si yo.
Orlando, le acuerdo que vamos despacio para que yo pueda ir traduciendo, ¿sí?
Ok,
Okay.
que le hable las preguntas.
So the
Bueno,
questions,
ante todo, un saludo
a greeting to
para
everyone
todos.
before everything. Greetings for everybody.
Sí, sí. Igualmente a Juan por haber hecho el trabajo
Equally to
en
Juan for
Camotí.
doing this work.
Es el lugar donde mis abuelos pasaron mucho tiempo
This is the place
danzando,
where
cambiando
this is the place
con
where
los
his
abuelos
grandparents
de
spent a lot of
Camotí, que
time
son
in
del
Camuti,
clan Bajucuba.
dancing.
Sí.
Dancing and so on.
También es un clan de los Hehenewa. Yo soy parte de los Yavícares Hehenewa, de Piracemo.
This is also
Bueno,
of the
Juan.
clan of Hehenewa, and he is a part of that clan also.
Me gustaría saber, Juan, quién es la persona que relata
He
en
wants to
español
know who is the person that tells the story, that narrates in Spanish
en la película.
in the film.
Sí. Sí, la persona que habla en el film se llama Erika Darken. Ella es una profesora de escuela y ella habla español como segunda lengua. Entonces, la idea de tenerla a ella como narradora es para que la persona que está escuchando el film sienta esa diferencia de un español que no está hablado, digamos, como uno está acostumbrado a escucharlo, sino que hay cierta dificultad al oírlo, ¿cierto?
Ok.
Sí. Y que es similar a cuando las mujeres que viven en las comunidades, digamos, del Cuyari, o las mujeres que se casan con los hombres cubeo de la comunidad, ellas aprenden a hablar cubeo, ¿cierto? En las comunidades. Ellas aprenden a hablar cubeo como segunda lengua, ¿cierto? Entonces, la idea era generar una cercanía entre esas mujeres que aprenden un idioma como segunda lengua y que la oyen como segunda lengua.
Do you want me to translate that one, or do you have it? Yes. Okay, cool. I got it. So the person who is translating is Erica Darkin, if I got that right. And then, so the idea was to have somebody that doesn't, for whom Spanish is a second language, to kind of recreate the sense of women who marry into the Cubeo community. And who have to learn this as a second language. So it was sort of, for native Spanish speakers, a way of hearing someone who isn't as familiar with the language, to recreate that sense of women marrying into this community who also have to learn a second language.
Esa era la razón, Orlando.
Bueno, Juan, no, ya me aclara muy bien. Estaba
So that's
preocupado
very clear.
precisamente por qué no escogerían una persona con una fluidez más clara en español.
Right.
I was also wondering why you wouldn't choose somebody that spoke Spanish more clearly or more fluently.
Ya, precisamente por esa dificultad, ¿cierto? Normalmente los films, la voz narrativa de los films normalmente habla un lenguaje que es dominante y habla en un tono dominante. Entonces, la idea era darle al film, darle a esa voz narradora del film otro carácter diferente, que fuera, sí, distinto a la voz dominante, para que, digamos, uno, si estuviera cerca a un narrador que nos cuenta una historia, pero que no es necesariamente una autoridad.
So normally in films that are made, they speak in a dominant language. And it was to kind of change that dynamic from having every person who speaks speak in that dominant language.
Right. So the idea was like to change the dynamic so that the authoritative voice is not that fluent Spanish person, but is someone who speaks Spanish as a second language, right? Orlando.
Sí.
Sí, continúa.
Juan. Bueno, igualmente al presentar, digamos, la entrada de la película, el texto, así como lo había comentado en el ensayo, me causó preocupación en cuanto, bueno, me dejó como decir, hice esto, pero como que me dijeron que no era verdad, algo así, ¿cierto?
Cierto, sí.
So
Sí, bueno. Entonces dije, personalmente, una situación que se presentó entre Juan y Severiano no debía ser descrito iniciando la película, pues, porque trascendería, digamos, una situación entre Juan y Severiano hacia la comunidad.
So I was worried that how in the beginning of the film it's presented as something along the lines of it's not true, and that maybe it shouldn't have been written that there was this problem between Severiano and Juan and the community.
Right. So, Orlando, lo que pasa es que en estos films que estamos haciendo actualmente, una de las cosas que uno quiere lograr es que el espectador esté más cercano de las cosas que a uno le pasan normalmente en las comunidades, ¿sí? Entonces, ese conflicto que yo tuve con el hijo de Severiano fue muy importante, porque a raíz de ese conflicto, él dijo que todo lo que yo dijera sobre ellos era algo que no era cierto.
So what we're trying to do with films now is make it so that the viewer who watches it is closer to the things that are actually happening in the community. And it was important to show that the conflict with Severiano's son, I thought it was important that he said that the things that I was showing or talking about were not necessarily true.
Exacto. Entonces, al principio, cuando yo fui invitado a la comunidad, fui muy bien recibido. Ellos estaban muy contentos con todo lo que yo estaba haciendo. Y durante esos meses, yo vengo trabajando con la comunidad del 2013, en contacto con ellos. Yo fui aceptado como alguien de la comunidad, ¿cierto? Era como otra persona de la comunidad, ¿sí? No había diferencia, no era tan extraño. Entonces había un trato cordial con ellos. Pero esa situación que ocurrió cambió la relación ¿sí? Yo ya no era como alguien de la comunidad, sino que yo era un extraño. Entonces al principio era como alguien de la comunidad y luego fui extraño. Y, y entonces marcar ese cambio de dinámica es muy importante porque los estudios de la Amazonía muestran cómo esas relaciones entre personas cercanas o personas extrañas pues muestran un mundo completamente diferente.
So at first, when I went to the community, I was very well received. In 2013, I was accepted as part of the community. There was a cordial agreement with them. But the conflict changed that relationship, and I suddenly became a stranger. And it's important to note that change in that relationship because it shows more of how these relationships that are of people that are both close and strangers to the community change in the Amazon.
Esa fue la razón por la cual Orlando, esa diferencia entre lo que es verdad y lo que no es verdad, es muy importante, ¿sí? Más en este momento donde hay como un interés de saber cómo se produce el sentido del lenguaje o el sentido de las prácticas y cómo ese sentido se construye a partir de la interacción de las personas, ¿sí? Diferente de un significado que sea estático.
So it's more important now than ever to show this difference between truth and untruth, in particular in terms of how to produce feelings, of languages and of practices. Yes.
Bueno, Juan, Juan,
Sí, adelante.
bueno, entonces, mm, a manera personal, ¿eso se va a dejar así? Digamos, ya quedó así la película.
Sí, se quedó así ya.
Is the movie really
Bueno.
going to stay this way? It's already done. Juan said yes, it's
Bueno,
done.
Pero,
listo,
pero no se preocupe, eso usted sabe, es como las fiestas. Las fiestas todas empiezan muy bien, todo el mundo está contento, todo el mundo trae la cosecha y la gente prepara la música y eso todo el mundo está contento. Pero lo que yo aprendí es que muchas fiestas se dañan. ¿Sí?
Sí.
Al final hay como una transición, un quiebre y esa transición también reconstruye la vida de la comunidad en maneras que uno no se imagina. Entonces por eso lo voy a dejar así.
Bueno.
So it's very normal for parties even parties start that way, or festivals. Everyone brings their gifts from the harvest and all that. But a lot of times parties go sour, and that just is part of the community as well.
No. Juan, espere, ¿sí me escucha?
Señor.
No, yo pienso que a nivel general el trabajo suyo es bien importante. Digamos, para el caso nuestro y la comunidad, es un trabajo que sirve para seguir socializando, mostrando a la comunidad y a los niños sobre una de las prácticas que aún se tienen en la comunidad. Sin
So
embargo,
I think,
bueno,
siga adelante.
sin embargo, lo que cuentan las abuelas, en este caso, Laura es mi abuela también, porque es la esposa del abuelo Rafael, que era bajuque, que es cierto. Entonces, lo que ella dice es que así se hacía anteriormente. Eso es verdad, que la práctica no va a ser tan igual como se hacía el baile de Kiraiñia, ¿cierto? Lo que preocupa es que se muestra que de pronto todo se ha perdido y que, bueno, en algunos casos uno diría, bueno, se perdió y en la comunidad no hay, ¿no? Pero sí, sí lo hay. Afortunadamente, Fernando está en la comunidad y a pesar de que no es Heheneque, no es del clan Bajuque, él tiene el conocimiento y lo comparte con los Hehenewa. Ahí creo que nos damos cuenta de la reciprocidad de conocimientos que hay, o sea, sin ninguna, entre comillas, sin ninguna mezquindad, digámoslo así. Así como se intercambia, por ejemplo, las mujeres entre ellos, eso es lo que se ve ahí, bueno, lo que yo conozco también en la comunidad. Fernando se casó con una bajuco, prima de Ernesto, y Ernesto se casó con la prima de Fernando Correa. Me parece interesante, al fin de cuentas, el documental, Juan.
Gracias, gracias Orlando.
So I think that your work is really important, especially to show to the children of the community and the community in general. I think what the grandmothers say is very important. I also count Laura as a grandmother, as she's married to Rafael. Was okay. So many things have been lost, and fortunately, for example, Fernando is not from the same clan, but he was able to share some of his knowledge, and I think it's very important, this reciprocity, this exchange of knowledge from different clans, as through exchanging through marrying in different clans. So that reciprocity of knowledge is very important.
Orlando, ¿quisieras agregar algo?
No, Juan, yo creo
¿O seguimos?
sí, seguimos. En términos generales, ya tenemos documentada la película acá. Vamos a seguir socializando. Pues lo que usted dice, ¿no? Esa es la dinámica y al compartir seguramente surtirán algunos comentarios, pero ya con la gente, con la comunidad, pero ya tenemos cuál es la explicación, el argumento que usted nos presenta.
Sí.
Okay, so we have the documentary here, and we're grateful for that, and I'm happy to hear comments from other people that are here.
So I think that the room is open now for questions.
Okay, so we can go ahead and begin to compile questions. You can add your name to the chat or raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll get an order going. I wanted to, as people think of their questions and join the list, I wanted to ask Janet if you wanted to speak to some of what Orlando has raised, or raise any questions of your own to start us off.
One of the things that I think is relevant is that these are long-term relationships between different groups. So for example, in this case, we see a Carapana family. Carapana stands for a language group. In the film, they are speaking Cubeo. Part of the reason for that is that this relationship between the two groups is very long-term. So the point is that people share the same grandparents in many cases. People had a mother who spoke the language that they marry into, for example. So just to add that to the complications, the other point that I would make a tweak or building on what Orlando said is that if this is an attempt to create a portion of the ceremony, then it makes sense that it would be Fernando and his family that are playing the instruments and entering, as the recipients, the hosts, are welcoming them, greeting, and giving beer to people. Let me also just say, just invite people to picture the Valpez Basin. You know, the Valpez is a tributary of the Rio Negro, and these villages are located right on the Valpez and its tributaries. So the marriages, so to speak, go across these river basins. And since there is an attempt to marry out, there always is in every village an element from elsewhere.
I want to go ahead. So feel free to add your name into the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. I think primarily for Orlando, but then I'm curious if Juan and Janet, you want to also add in. But I'm interested in the relationship with Irving Goldman and the sort of research history and the correspondence. And so I wanted to ask Orlando for your insights into kind of that history of anthropology in the region and how you see this film connecting to that in your own work as an anthropologist.
Orlando, el Elliot pregunta, ¿quiere saber más sobre la relación con con Irving Goldman? ¿Y cómo ve usted la película en el legado de la antropología en la región?
Igual, Irving Goldman observó muchas cosas en las décadas de los 30 más o menos, ¿cierto? Tal vez en ese momento la situación o las prácticas eran mucho más completas, si lo pudiéramos entender de esa manera. De aquí para allá, sabemos que se han presentado cambios, por no decir muchos. Por ejemplo, los rituales en los que tal vez Goldman pudo participar, hoy en día ya no se practica en la familia, en las dos comunidades prácticamente. Que cuando llegó Irving, los intercambios respecto a las danzas se hacía entre Camutí y Piracemo, prácticamente. Son dos clanes parientes, digámoslo así, dos clanes hermanos. Unos Bajucua y otros Cubeo-Hehenewa. Y eso lo observó Irving Goldman. Él diferenció de todas maneras esos dos clanes. pero hay un relacionamiento muy cercano entre nosotros, entre los de Camutí y los de Piracemo. Y la práctica de Kiraiñia, claro que sí, era mucho más seguramente así como lo relata la abuela Laura, tal vez era mucho más, ¿cómo se podría decir? Completa o exuberante, ¿cierto? Con todo su elegante, con las indumentarias, ¿sí? Los pasos, bueno, la seriedad que colocaban ahí en ese entonces. El cambio hoy en día se presenta, claro que sí, a través, por la inmersión de tantas cosas que las comunidades hemos afrontado, las comunidades han afrontado, desde la misma educación hasta los programas que llegan en las comunidades. Y tiene que ver mucho en la parte de educación es porque las generaciones, desde nuestros padres, se separaron en cierto modo de su comunidad de origen. Es decir, por ejemplo, los de Camutí, Piracemo, Santa Elena, inclusive los jóvenes de todo el Caño Cuyari se separaron de sus comunidades y se vinieron al pueblo a participar en la educación occidental a través del sistema de internados. Eso hizo que se presentara una separación, una irrupción, digamos, de seguir practicando las costumbres en las comunidades. Cuando llegó Irving, yo me imagino que era mucho mejor. Él describe muchas cosas importantes en el libro Los Cubeo, ya que su estadía fue en Camutí y una parte en Piracemo.
Orlando, qué pena que lo pare ahí para que Oron pueda traducirle,
Vale.
pero tenga el pensamiento ahí.
Bien.
Okay.
So I think that when Irving was here in the 1930s, the practices were a lot more complete. There have been a lot of changes since then. The rituals in which Goldman participated are no longer there. Goldman observed that the differences between these two communities, Camuti and Tiracemo, and one of those changes was that young people came to study in the Western education system. This constituted a separation. So when Goldman was here, things were a lot better.
Orlando, siga ahí.
Listo. Respecto a la participación de la antropología, yo pienso que a pesar de yo ser antropólogo titulado en la Universidad Nacional, por decir algo, la verdad yo no he profundizado en esos temas. Precisamente porque lo que decía usted, Juan, la dinámica es que se piensa todavía que la persona que salió a estudiar, que se preparó fuera de la comunidad, cuando llega a hacer una investigación, se piensa que se va a enriquecer, que va a hacer plata con eso, que va a ir a vender. Entonces, yo sentí muchísimo esa situación de que la gente, no solamente en la comunidad, sino aquí a nivel del departamento, había como esa preocupación, digamos, de que llegue una persona de la comunidad que fue a estudiar y va a venir a investigar y sacar la información. Lo mismo que se piensa cuando llega una persona ajena a la comunidad. Por
Párelo
eso,
ahí. Qué pena, Orlando. Pare ahí.
So even though when thinking about the participation of anthropologists in the community, even though I went to the National University in Columbia to study anthropology, I haven't looked too deep into these issues because unfortunately it is still thought in the community that someone who is from the community and leaves to study and then comes back to do research in the community, that their goal is to get rich or to steal information from the community.
Sí, Orlando, siga.
Sigue.
Sin embargo, a pesar de esa situación y la preocupación de la comunidad, yo valoro mucho los trabajos que han hecho los antropólogos, digamos, en sí, desde mucho más antes, tal vez, otras personas, pero más Irving, que llegó a la comunidad, y desde mis abuelos y mis padres fueron coinvestigadores de él, fueron los que brindaron la información, ¿cierto? En este caso de los Yaví Carjejenaba y también los de Camutí. Creo que esa información o esos documentos que dejaron o están dejando los antropólogos son muy importantes de poder seguir socializando, o por lo menos si se está perdiendo, estamos perdiendo, recordar que sí existieron esas prácticas en las comunidades. En ese sentido, la antropología juega un papel importante para mí y también para la comunidad. Hoy en día, creo que la mayoría hemos comprendido que esos trabajos nos ayudan, nos pueden fortalecer hacia el rescate de las costumbres, de los rituales, de los usos que hemos ido perdiendo poco a poco. Claro está que estamos en un cambio, eso sí, pero estos trabajos de los antropólogos nos ayudan a pensar qué tan importante sería tener estos usos y costumbres que nuestros abuelos practicaron desde la antigüedad.
So even though the community sees both researchers from the same community or even researchers from outside the community in the same way with this kind of suspicion, I value the work that anthropologists have done, especially Irving Goldman. My grandparents were basically his co-researchers. These things are very important because we are losing the memory of these rituals, and we are coming to understand that these documents, documentaries, and so on are very important for us.
Yeah. I will answer Jonathan's question he posted on the chat. So yes, I had the chance to record different performances done with the Kiraiñia. I recorded some in Camuti, and I recorded also performances done by other clan of the Cubeo. I think that what I consider the most important recordings I made were the sort of vocalizations performers used to develop the compositions. So I met a Cubeo elder whose name is Luis Enrique Llanos, and he knew an entire repertoire of Kiraiñia flutes, and yes, the repertoire were named by different palms, different fish, different species of birds, and so we did a sound recording of the entire repertoire, and he said, well, this is the repertoire, now we need to find performers that are able to basically to transform these vocalizations into the dance. So we began to do that, and we were able to do like pairing three pieces of the repertoire. So I have the vocalizations of the piece, and I have the piece performed with the long flutes. And doing these recordings is when I realized that even though they use improvisation for keeping this music going, they also have some compositional techniques that allows them to create the dances, or something that we would call like the music itself. So it's very interesting because they not only do like call and response, but they have a system that is in between sentences they said in their own languages and words that are closer to ideophones. So they have ideophones and texts that are being vocalized in certain way that construct a, let's say, like a score that construct the theme. And then when this score, in my work I call them sonic inscription. When they present a sonic inscriptions of a single theme, the theme goes with repetition 1, repetition 2, coda, variation 1, variation 2. So they follow a system, but the system is laid out using these vocalizations, in which there is a combination between uses of ideophones and texts, and sometimes these texts are voiced by those different species, right? So which is something that I'm discussing on my dissertation, but I found them very present, not only in the Cubeo, but also in other performances that relates to panpipe flutes and duct flutes that they call tanayo, and long flutes as well. So I'm like trying to theorize these compositional techniques and the relation they have built upon ideophones and this that you will call musicalized speech, for sure.
Can I just add to that question? I've written a lot about theme and variation in the long flutes called Maui or Yapurtu.
Yes.
So do you think that kind of, when they start playing variants, it seems to me that's when the transformations are taking place? If you're into perspectivism, you would say that's when you become the other, although I disagree with that other becomingness stuff. I think it's more an engagement with the other, because, as you know, what I consider musicalization is a process that allows, as Alan Basso has said, allows us to acknowledge the otherness of the other. That is, engaging historically with the other, but not becoming the other. That would defeat the whole purpose. I think the whole idea is to be able to experience that transformation into otherness, but without becoming other. Because becoming
yes. What I have seen here is that they are bringing repertoires, or they are setting in motion these other beings through the repertoire they choose for different events. So, and that happens through sound, or through these musicalized sounds. And at that level, we see all these species having a relation with specific type of ceremonies with specific types of beverage that are prepared, and so they are let's say woodpeckers are invited to be on the party, and they are bring together through the long flutes, and they are there, right? And so the instruments musicalize or amplify their presence to the performance. What I found also really interesting is that Goldman also saw another layer of this transformation, or the amplification that also happened musically, and it has to do with what in the film we hear as when Hernandez is talking about his hand and how the flutes have this relation with the bodies of their ancestors. So even though the repertoires are amplifying or are bringing into being these other presences, or this other presence, the body of the ancestors, which are rendered by the instruments, and the entire community moving through the longhouse, also add another layer that has to do with the communal body of the ancestors, like the prototypical ancestors, that has to do with what Orlando was telling, like it's a part of the Carapana, or it's a part of the Cubeo, or it's part of other prototypical ancestor that composes the life of the community. So in my work, I'm trying to identify all these layers, like when musicalized speech is present, and which kind of interventions are being done through sound, and when and how the body of these prototypical ancestors are set in motion by these different language groups within the single community.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Juan and Jonathan. We have another question coming up, but I wanted to ask if Janet wanted to weigh in on the conversation we've been having.
Well, excuse me. I don't want to interrupt this very interesting discussion about musicality, but I do want to add that the Northwest Amazon really problematizes the idea of community because it's extremely complex. The notion of community, when it comes to ancestors, refers to a descent group and the ancestors of that descent group. So in any given settlement, you'll have a main, you'll have the Sibs core relating to their ancestors and connecting that to the village and its name and the language group. But I wanted to add to what Orlando was saying by talking about the church, because the church has played a very important role along the Valpez River. For one thing, it introduced the dominant languages, Spanish and Portuguese. Of course, these were present through rubber and so on, but the church introduced the literacy in these dominant languages, and that made it possible for Goldman and other anthropologists to create this collaboration. Goldman continues his collaboration with his Cubeo colleagues over years and years and years through correspondence, through writing letters. But I also then wanted to add the irony that the church goes through sort of pulses of rejecting and allowing traditional phenomena. And what I see in that, working among the neighbors of the Cubeo, what I see of that is the extraordinary resilience and the ability to reach back in time, shall we say, and resuscitate these things. There have been several moments of revitalization. And with each of those, you have a resurgence of malokas, you have a retrieving into the past, and this is, I hope Orlando speaks to this, perhaps he insinuated it. This is where the work of anthropologists comes in. I know in my own work, my tape collections have been very useful in these revitalization efforts. So what we're seeing in this film is a moment in that process. We're hearing from the elders how they feel as though the past is gone. We'll never be able to retrieve the past, but at the same time, we're seeing how an attempt is made to reconstitute the past.
Okay, so
I wanted to ask, sorry, Juan.
go
Laura
ahead.
Graham had a question in the chat, but Laura, do you want to go ahead and ask it to the panel?
Oh, yeah, I was wondering if you could tell us about something about the use of media in this community. What is the broader media context in which you come in with a camera and start filming? Do people in the community use their own audio visual? And if so, what kinds of things do they record and film, and how is it used within the community? How do they think about their use of media, if they do, and then you coming in with that? Is media something that anthropologists and researchers use, or is it something integral in the community and used in maybe different or similar or complementary ways? So tell us a little bit about media in the community and the context in which, the media context in which this film emerges.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. At the time I was there, there was no electricity for the entire community. So they live relatively close to me too, but they don't, like, at least until like 2 years ago, they didn't have, or they didn't use technology maybe as they are using it now, because now they have solar panels. But when I was there, they were like using radio, but they weren't doing recordings of anything of their own, right? So meaning they were not filming their parties, they were not even taking pictures of themselves during the parties. They were using like sound systems, but for parties or for watching films or watching soccer games and news and soap operas at the school. But at that time, in the time I was there was no electricity in the community. This changed when I left the community. Now they have their own solar panel. So I think that these new media practices is something that I will need to know more, because when I left the community, when we were building the longhouse, just small radios and the school having the TV and the like an antenna for the football league of Spain was the only thing that they were tuning in. But I think this is going to be like changed with this new uses of electricity. For instance, they told me that the first domestic place, or the first house that had electricity in Camuti, was the longhouse we built, because they were able to electrify it. So they were so happy, because then they will be able to party and to use boomboxes and things like that. But there was also another practice, but I didn't have the chance to go deeper. And is in December they buy music in Me Too for dancing in their communities for holidays. So the entire community gathered money and they buy like USB, like flashcards, to plug into their boom boxes. But I was so surprised and shocked that even though they bought the MP3, they were only playing 2 songs all the time. So from the thousands of songs that were at the USB, they were just playing 2. Always the 2 of them, who were like the great hits of the region. But yeah, this is like what I know about their current uses of media.
Just to follow that up, and maybe you also have something to say from the community, but I find it interesting that they were playing radios, but not using small tape recorders, because where I work, and I know in many places, at least in Brazil, many indigenous groups were using tape recorders when they didn't have electricity in their communities, powered by batteries. In fact, it could be the bane of anthropologists, because they were, we'd show up with batteries and they wanted all of our batteries to record and then play back their, what they recorded. So that's very interesting. You didn't tell us the 2 songs that they played, were those Colombian music genres like cumbia or something? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. They were one was a song that was produced in Lower Baupés, and it's a mix of a narco corrido, and the other song was it was a song popularized in Villavicencio. Orlando, ¿usted se acuerda de esa canción de La Rana? Por casualidad.
¿La canción de la rana?
Sí, que sonaba en diciembre.
Yo me acuerdo, pero lo contaron ¿quiénes? Los hermanos Vélez de Villa Fátima.
Ah, sí.
Ellos se llama, el grupo de ellos se llama Ají Picante. ¿Sí? Ají Picante, el grupo musical de ellos. Entonces, lo que ellos hacen es adaptar algo así como historias de la región y le colocan la música fiestas como eso, final de año, eventos así.
Ellos son de Villa Fátima.
Sí, señor, son de Villa Fátima.
Villa Fátima es cercana a Yabarate.
Sí, exacto, es bajo Baupés, más cercano a Bocas de Querarí, frontera con Brasil. Son de la etnia Guanano.
Here we go. Autumn, do you want to translate that? Autumn, do you want to translate that part?
Un poquito, pero there were 2 songs, and I was wondering too.
Okay.
But the first one, did you say was produced in? You already said this, that it was
Villavicencio, right?
And then the second one was produced in Villavicencio, pero the last part, I did not get. Where?
Okay, so I will do it. So, Laurie.
Oh, Juan, you're muted.
Sorry. So, Laurie, Orlando was telling us that there is a group of musicians from Villa Fatima, who is a community nearby Bocas del Querari, near to Yabarate. And this is a group of Tuwananos, and they tell stories of the region, and they musicalize them using popular genres. And this is the music that the people in community were listening to.
Gracias, gracias.
We have a question next from Gloria.
Yes. Yeah, all of us read the question, right? I think so.
Gloria, ¿quiere preguntar al grupo?
Okay, I talked to Gloria. I don't know if we can call her to join. If we tell Orlando to invite her, come over. She wants to join, definitely.
Gloria pregunta que casi no ha escuchado, entonces, pero sin embargo va a participar.
Dale, Gloria. Hola.
No sé, cualquier cosa que...
Adelante, adelante.
Vamos a traducir aquí.
Hola, Juan.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, bien, gracias. No he podido escuchar mucho porque pues solamente tenemos un equipo y unos audífonos. Entonces no he podido escuchar, me he perdido parte de las traducciones y del diálogo que hicieron. Pero escuchando, por ejemplo, lo que decía Orlando, algo medio enredado por ahí logré captar sobre la parte introductoria de la película, que sí me gustaría. Yo lo coloqué en tu WhatsApp. Que es una inquietud que tengo, más si lo que yo te decía, o sea, la intención es que la película pueda ser parte del Museo Virtual del SENA, como un aporte, ¿cierto?, al fortalecimiento y al rescate también de los sonidos tradicionales o ancestrales del Baupés. Entonces, sí, porque yo sé que me van a preguntar cuál es la intencionalidad de haber colocado esa parte inicial que como indígena, o sea, para mí no es clara. De pronto lo que colocaba yo en el chat, de pronto en lo académico puede ser claro, o sea, dependiendo de a quién va dirigida la película, si es para las personas estudiosas de antropología, de musicología, ¿cierto?, de sociología, puede ser claro, pero para las comunidades no va a ser claro. Para las comunidades eso va a generar muchos más comentarios, va a generar inquietud, va a generar como que molestias muy seguramente. Entonces ahí es donde sí me gustaría poder entender cuál fue esa intencionalidad de escribir algo que fue muy particular y que se vuelva como general, ¿cierto? Que se vuelva como de conocimiento y dominio de muchas otras personas que muy seguramente no entienden la razón ni la raíz de esa situación.
So I couldn't hear everything. As we're a little limited with just one computer and one set of one set of headphones. But I think that the work and the film can be part of the SENA Virtual Museum in Colombia. But I want to ask about this part in the beginning of the film, because for us it's very valuable. But I know that the community, the indigenous people, are going to ask me about this part in the beginning where I believe she's referring to what we'd spoken before about that chisme, that untruth, right? Parenthetical. So maybe it would be clear for academics, sociologists, anthropologists, but it will not be clear for the community why you opened with something so specific and then went to something general.
Bueno, no, eso, tu comentario es increíble. Y ese es el problema de nosotros. Ese es uno de los grandes problemas que la antropología tiene, Gloria. Y, porque nos dividen las audiencias, ¿sí? El reto de poder hablarle a una audiencia tiene como esas situaciones. Inicialmente yo hice una versión en pamié. Bueno, yo no la hice, la versión era en pamié, ¿cierto? Y esa fue la versión que presentamos en el SENA. Esa fue la versión que presentamos en Huacurabá. Y las personas no reaccionaron, digamos, tan fuerte con la parte del principio. Autumn?
Yep. Wasn't sure if you finished. Okay. So your commentary is very important. This happens to us a lot when we're trying to present to two different audiences. So first, I did do a version in Palmier, or I did the same version in Palmier. We also presented in El Sena, in Colombia, Huaquiraba, and there wasn't such a strong reaction to this part in the beginning.
Sin embargo, Gloria, pues si tú consideras que es tan desorientador, lo podemos conversar. Pero hay una intención que tiene que ver con la evaluación, y tú lo nombraste, ¿cierto? Eso es muy importante del film, porque está en el criterio de quien ve el film hacer esa evaluación, pero que no solamente venga del texto, ¿cierto? Porque digamos, las personas leen esa parte introductoria, pero esa parte introductoria parece que no tuviera relación con lo que se muestra en el film, ¿cierto? Que es cuando Orlando habla de que se presenta muy bien tal como es. Entonces, eso fue una discusión que tuvimos con la directora de producción del film, María Giraldo, en la cual estábamos tratando de encontrar un punto medio en donde el film nos hiciera preguntas, donde el film nos tocara profundamente en la audiencia en Vaupés, para que tuviéramos una actitud proactiva con la música. Por ejemplo, a través del film no se escucha de manera completa una canción de Yapurutú, ¿cierto? Solamente hay fragmentos. Eso también es intencional. Si quieres, Autumn.
Sí. So, however, so people, when I first showed it in the Sena and other places here in Colombia, they didn't react so strong. But if Gloria, if you consider it very disorienting, we can discuss it. But there is an intention that has to do with the evaluation it's important for the film that this is there, that people read the introduction, but the introduction doesn't look like the rest of the film. We had this discussion with the production director, Maria Giraldo, and we wanted the film to touch us in a way that we would have this relationship with the music. So for example, in the film, there's not a full song of the Yuruputu.
Y la razón de eso es que en muchos films que fueron hechos en Brasil, después que las canciones y las danzas habían sido grabadas completamente, muchas comunidades pararon de hacer muchas danzas y ya tenían las grabaciones. Entonces en muchas comunidades ellos decidieron más bien poner la música que ya había sido grabada para danzar con la música, ¿sí? Eso ha pasado en la Amazonía, pero también pasa en Estados Unidos. Ya digamos, la economía ha cambiado tanto que muchas veces uno no puede contratar un grupo de la música que a uno le gusta, sino que uno usa el radio, el cassette, y uno tiene su propia música y la escucha cuando quiere. Entonces, fue una decisión no presentar una grabación completa. La presencia de esa ausencia, por ejemplo, hizo que en muchas comunidades del Cudulları la gente sintiera la necesidad de construir los instrumentos nuevamente para poder escuchar la música completa, ¿sí? Eso fue una respuesta al film. Ellos sintieron que el film estaba incompleto, pero que ellos sabían cómo era y querían mostrarle a su familia cómo era. Entonces los tíos, los papás, se hicieron a la tarea de construir los instrumentos para mostrarle a sus hijos cómo sonaba la música. Eso me parece muy importante.
So the reason that we chose not to have a complete recording of the Kiraiñia is that because a lot of times when people record full songs is that the community has the recording and they choose to dance and listen just to that. So that happens in the United States too, where we don't hire full bands to play music that we want to hear anymore. We just dance and listen to music that's already recorded. So it was a decision to have to not have a complete recorded, but instead to have for them a recording of how to build this instrument so they can ask their uncles, aunts, and so on how to build the instrument so that they can listen to it again live on their own. So that was that incompleteness was part of the goal of the film.
Renato. Renato. Do you have a question?
Yo estaba pensando si hablara en castellano o en portugués, como quiera. Pero creo que voy a hablar en castellano. Me gustó bastante, Juan, la presentación y sobre todo el diálogo que existe con Orlando y con Gloria. Me pareció muy bien. Y gracias, Janete, que me fez abrir un libro que hacía por lo menos 20 años o más que no abría. Entonces fui a verificar las referencias que Janete ha puesto desde el inicio de esta charla. Me pareció muy interesante. Yo tengo dos cuestiones que me parece, porque yo trabajo en este lado de Brasil, pero con un grupo no muy grande como los cubeos. Los cubeos son inmensos, son grandes. Es pequeño, es un grupo que llamamos Jupda. No sé si Gloria y Orlando conoces, pero los instrumentos son los mismos instrumentos que tenemos de este lado de Brasil. Y esos instrumentos tienen nombres. Cada uno tiene sus nombres, y cada uno tiene sus pares, y cada uno tiene su música específica. Yo estoy hablando diante de Jonathan Hill, que conoce muy bien. Entonces, es una cosa así muy interesante. Entonces, me pareció en la película que los nombres no se estaba, ¿cómo decir? Colocando los nombres que tienen un significado, un meaning bastante importante adentro de la concepción no solamente de la música y danza, porque es la misma palabra, música y danza es la misma palabra, por lo menos en la lengua que conozco yo. No conozco tu cubeo, pero es una misma palabra, ¿no? Eso es una cosa. Y me pareció que los nombres son importantes. No sé lo que sería interesante en las discusiones cuando estoy con los Jupda, es que hablamos, por ejemplo, de un pin, que es la pequeña flauta con 3 furos, que es pin, o hablamos de un yapurutú, que hablaste tú, es distinto, pero ellos tienen papeles distintos en la concepción musical y también en la composición no solamente de la armonía, pero de la coreografía, se podríamos decir. Son coreografías distintas de acuerdo con los nombres de los papeles que tienen otro significado. Yo creo que eso me pareció muy interesante que en el filme, y que podría ser más valorizado en términos de las cosas más, pero es una cosa muy personal mía, es una discusión que podría ser un poco más amplia. Y la otra parte que es importante ahí es como Janet ha hablado, los clanes tienen una relación muy importante, y Jonathan conoce muy bien, tienen una relación muy importante, y los clanes tienen música específica. Cada uno tiene su música específica. No se puede de un clan cantar la música de otro. Esto por la experiencia propia entre los clanes Jupda. Esta es la música específica de un clan. Se canta esta música muy específica en aquel momento, porque es la especificidad del conocimiento, evidentemente, que está muy vinculado a lo yayé, porque lo yayé es la música también. Entonces, es una relación profunda, la música. Y los clanes que son vinculados a las jerarquías. Esto no me pareció un poco claro en el film. Me gustaría de conocer un poco más. Si era un clan que estaba cantando, si eran 2 que estaban juntos, o si eran 2 que estaban interconectando, intercambiando, porque la grande fiesta que llamamos acá, que son las fiestas de las máscaras, y que está muy bien descrito con Goldman, es lo intercambio de los saberes, y los 2 intercambios de los saberes son los intercambios de las músicas. Entonces me pareció también me gustó inmensamente yo pongo estas cuestiones porque es un poco con cosas que trabajo yo también de este lado de la frontera. Muchas gracias de conocer Orlando y Gloria, muy placer.
Claro, claro. Em, em, yo quisiera responderte, Renato, con unas imágenes que hemos organizado y que hemos sacado del film. Si Elliot nos puede ayudar, por favor.
¿Quiere que yo traduzca el comentario? Ya.
Sí.
Bueno. No, tranquilo. So so I have two questions. One of them has to do with the names of the instrument. I work with the Huta in Brazil, where the names are very important. And notably, music and dance use the same word in the community that I work with. And also, the other question I have is related to how each clan has its own music, and how how there was an interchange of musics that are specific to each clan, and also how maybe in some cases the clans don't share or don't allow the other to play their music.
So yes, the case in this community is different. Here you see in this first image, you see Fernando, Mauricio, and they are Carapana, right?
Right.
Even though the Dabukuri is happening in a Cubeo-Hehenewa village, they are performing the instruments, and they are bringing their own repertoires, right? And they are the music specialists of this Hehenewa community, even though they are not Hehenewa. This is a case that is different from what you mentioned originally, and this is related to what Orlando was telling us about the sharing, the possibility of sharing their knowledge with the in-law that was also mentioned by Janet. So in this community, Elliot, if you go to the other image, we see Severiano and Julia. Severiano is Hehenewa and Julia is Juruti, right? So they belong to different groups. They are like in-laws. The next one, okay, she's Julia. And the next one. Then these are the Carapana, and the Carapana, Mauricio and Fernando, they are the main music specialists of the community, right? Which is, again, is very interesting, because usually we think that the music of the community, like that there is a divide. We think that there is a divide. In this Tucanoan community, we see that the Cubeo-Hehenewa are dancing the repertoire that is being brought by Carapana music specialists, right? So this is something I wanted really to emphasize here, that relates to Renato's question. If we go to the other slide, we see Laura and Aida, who are from a Curipaco Tarabuaco group, that again gives us another layer of how these different Tucanoan communities are shaping the what is being presented as the music of the Cubeo-Hehenewa, right? And the last one are what we will say the proper Hehenewa of Camuti, right? So we see Ernesto, Maria, Giovanna, who is Ernesto's daughter. We see Laura, and we see Raúl and Jaumer, right? So with these images, I want to highlight how those how the exchange between these two Kanuan language group are at play in Camuti. Sorry if that was a very long part for you, Autumn.
Thank you very much. Now I understand better.
Good. That's good. So, Elliot, I think that we can return. Yes.
Thank you, Juan. I think so. That's our final question. And so what I would like to do now is to ask Juan, Orlando, and Janet if they would like to contribute some concluding remarks, and then we'll move towards wrapping up for today.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was reading Jonathan's comment on the chat. Yes, right. They are they're Arawakan communities. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to ask Juan why he, since so many people found it very important and key to understanding what is going on, why he does not introduce the different identifications or affiliations of the people in the film. We get the impression that it is one homogeneous group, when in fact these distinctions, as I think were made very clear in Renato's discussion, and Orlando's earlier, these distinctions are crucial. The reciprocity that Orlando brought up earlier is only understandable in terms of two distinct groups.
I agree completely. But I think that this brings us back to my conversation with Lori and Vienna when she said, Juan, you should mark all the language shifting that is happening on the film. And I say, okay, let's do that. And that's why you saw the colors, like emphasizing this. But that's also why you see the discussion happening between men and women, trying to really like producing the sense of everything. And for some viewers, that was too much, right? That was a lot of exchange, a lot of like encounters and disencounters, and I thought that adding labels of people's language group will increase like an uneasiness for a viewer trying to handle all this information happening on screen, right? And that's basically why I decided not to include it in the film, because I got a lot of feedback about the film with like having so many captions, like so many text. So I received that feedback, and that's why you only have names so that viewers can familiarize a little bit with each character and their role in the film. But I also knew that this type of analysis that is more akin to art, that is more that is closer to our own academic interest in talking and discussing low loss North America will find relevant, and that's why we made it. We prepared for presenting it today.
Janet, you're muted.
Need to unmute. you know, I had the same problem. I was trying to describe this even to my husband, who has accompanied me in this over, you know, 40 years. And he said, why don't you just say two families? You know, there it is. The point of difference is really what matters. The point of two different entities, so that it's not the Karapana creating a ceremony that is Cubeo. It's the Karapana creating a ceremony that is theirs for the Cubeo. At least that's how I now understand it after grappling with this for a while. Thank you. Thank you. By the way, I should add that I appreciate they don't spell everything out in the film. I think that is an important matter. And I don't know how to reconcile the over-explanation with the need for a certain amount of background. It's a difficult choice, isn't it?
Yes, so we were trying to do something I learned from Javier when I met him. When I met him in our first CRACIA event, he was telling us and showing us films he was analyzing from the Smithsonian, and he was telling us like how in the storytelling of these films there was like such a level of sense making that were at the same time storytelling, but they were at the same time gesture, but at the same time they were happening on film, right? So that conversation was very foundational to the work I ended up doing, like making with film. So this film works as a transcription, but it's also like a transduction of what I have learned, of what Jonathan has taught me about musicalizing speech, or the ritual communication ideologies, and all the emphasis that Janet had put on like double back talk, and all these ways of meaning, or all the senses that happens through speaking in others' tongue, all these things that were highly theoretical, I found a way to make them present to the film, right? So and I hope that people will enjoy the film without knowing all of this. but I think something that is valuable is that viewers for sure are going to be exposed to a very complicated way of speaking, a very complicated way of communicating each other, that enriches and that presents in a way Orlando's ways of life and our interest on knowing more about these forms of expressive culture in lowland South America.
But let me begin by saying thank you. As we begin to close, I think it's a very elegant film, and I want to thank you for that. It's certainly provocative. One of the strategies in making it provocative is to keep it non-reduced, to keep it complicated in the way it is. Thanks.
Thank you. Orlando?
Finales. Bueno, otra vez es agradecerle a Juan como profesional en antropología, que conoce acá en la región, igual que los demás antropólogos que participan ahí, que conocen muchas culturas. Yo creo que de mi parte solo valoro lo que hizo Juan, no estoy en contra de nada, pero muy importante los comentarios que hace Juan en el sentido de argumentar por qué se presentan las situaciones, los detalles en la película. Es interesante lo que manifiesta Juan, usted hacia los observadores o espectadores, en el sentido de crear la inquietud. La idea, ya entiendo que no es dar la información completa, sino crear lo que yo le decía al comienzo, me causa preocupación. Claro, usted sí en su película me causó la preocupación y ahí estaré. Muchas gracias, Juan, y muchas gracias a todos. Y Gloria.
¿Va Gloria también? ¿Está bien?
Claro.
Claro.
Yo, o sea, como comentario final, yo quiero decir que entendí lo complicado que es hacer una película y tener contentos a todos, ¿cierto? En el film. Es complicado, eso fue lo que entendí ahorita digamos, con este conversatorio. Pero hay que resaltar que de una u otra manera lo importante es generar procesos. Y para mi caso particular, o sea, me genera un proceso porque Juan sabe que yo trabajo sobre el tema de las aves. Y dentro de la musicología, bueno, no sé si es música, bueno, no sé, no soy experta en música, pero sí hay una gran relación entre la música, los instrumentos, los cantos, las aves y los animales que conviven con estas poblaciones indígenas aquí en el departamento del Baupés. Entonces, digamos que lo que permite esta película es abrir muchas más opciones y expectativas de trabajo con estas comunidades. Como lo decía Renato, o sea, las relaciones no solamente se dan entre los grupos indígenas, entre los clanes, sino también entre estos grupos indígenas y la naturaleza. Y eso es lo importante de resaltar. Y no, me queda clarísimo. Muy difícil tener contento a todo el mundo. Pero no, muy bien, Juan. Felicitaciones. Y ya sabes, por acá te estamos esperando. Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias, Gloria.
On Orlando's part, thank you to Juan and all the anthropologists that have worked with us. I'm not against anything. I support the sense of argument. I understand now this sense of incompleteness as important for the film. And I'm happy with that. And on Gloria's part, I understand now how complicated it is to make a film. And as you know, I'm not really a specialist in music. I specialize more in birds. And I'm so fascinated by this relationship between the musicality and nature and birds. I agree that with the importance of the incompleteness of the film. And we know it's hard to keep everybody happy. And we're waiting for you here.
Thank you. And as a final word of thanks, I'd like to ask Chris Hewlett to say a concluding remark on behalf of CRACIA.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. And thank you all to the panelists, Janet and Juan and Orlando. Queremos agradecer a usted, Orlando, muchas gracias por su participación, y Gloria también por su participación y por las preguntas. Thank you all for joining us today. It's great to have you here on behalf of CRACIA. And if you want to find out more about CRACIA, you can go to CRACIA, CRACIA.org. And we also want to thank Mother Tongue Film Festival for partnering with us today and for supporting this event and for nominating Juan's film. Congratulations to Juan. And there's more information about that at mothertongue.si.edu. Thank you all very much. Muchas gracias a todos.